The next morning, Megan barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside her window, sent her heart racing. She glanced at the clock, 11:15 a.m. If she was going to meet him, she needed to leave soon. Across the street, Samantha sat in her salon, keeping an eye on Megan's building. She twirled her scissors absent-mindedly, pretending to listen to her customer complain about her husband's socks on the living room floor. Samantha's real focus was on Megan. She hasn't left the house all morning, Samantha murmured to herself, earning a confused look from her customer. At 11:50, Megan finally stepped out, her sleek black coat draped over her shoulders. She scanned the street cautiously before heading down the sidewalk. Samantha perked up. "Laura," she hissed at her best friend, who was folding towels at the back of the salon. "She's leaving." "I'm following her." Laura groaned. "Can't you just mind your own business for once?" But Samantha had already grabbed her bag and was out the door. Megan walked quickly, her heels clicking against the pavement. She kept her head down, her eyes darting to every alley and corner. She didn't notice Samantha trailing a safe distance behind, expertly weaving through the morning bustle of the neighborhood. Megan turned into a quiet park. Samantha stopped at the entrance, pretending to adjust her shoe. From her vantage point, she could see Megan sitting on a bench near the fountain. Moments later, a man in a leather jacket appeared from the opposite direction. Samantha's eyes widened. It was the same man who had left the note at Megan's door the previous evening. He approached Megan with deliberate steps and sat down beside her. Samantha edged closer, pretending to be interested in a vendor selling hot dogs nearby. She strained her ears, trying to catch bits of their conversation. "What do you want, Nathan?" Megan's voice was low but sharp. "You didn't think you could just disappear, did you?" Nathan replied coolly. Megan's jaw tightened. "I left for a reason. I'm not going back." "You don't have a choice," Nathan said, his tone darkening. "You know what happens if you don't hold up your end." Samantha's stomach churned. What is she mixed up in? Megan shook her head, her voice trembling slightly. "I've done enough. I'm not playing your games anymore." Nathan leaned in closer, his voice barely audible now. Whatever he said made Megan go pale. She stood abruptly, clutching her coat. "This is the last time," she hissed before storming off. Nathan remained seated for a moment, watching her leave. Then, as if sensing someone was watching, he turned his head and locked eyes with Samantha. Samantha froze, her hand halfway to her purse. Nathan's piercing gaze lingered on her for a beat too long before he stood and walked away, disappearing into the park's winding paths. Samantha's pulse raced. She ducked behind the hot dog stand, her mind spinning. She hadn't meant to be seen. But now she had questions, and a sneaking suspicion she might have bitten off more than she could chew. Back at her apartment, Megan locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. She opened the chest again, pulling out a thick manila folder. Flipping through the pages, she stopped at one, a contract. Her hand hovered over the page, her eyes scanning the fine print. It was a deal she had hoped to leave behind, a part of her past she thought she could escape. But now it was clear, Nathan wasn't going to let her go that easily. A knock at the door startled her. Her heart leapt as she hesitated. "It's Jake," a familiar voice called out. Relief washed over her. She opened the door slightly, peering out. "What are you doing here?" Jake held up a bag. "I noticed you didn't have much in your place yesterday. Thought you could use some groceries." Megan's guard dropped slightly. She opened the door wider, allowing him to hand her the bag. "That's kind of you. Thank you." Jake gave a small smile but lingered in the doorway. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but are you okay? You seemed tense yesterday." Megan hesitated, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. I'm fine. Just settling in. Jake nodded slowly. If you ever need anything, let me know. I live a few blocks away. Thanks, Megan said, offering a faint smile before closing the door. Jake walked away, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Megan wasn't telling him the full story. Across the street, Samantha sat in her salon, her thoughts swirling. She replayed the scene at the park in her head, every word she managed to overhear, every glance exchanged. Laura walked in, holding a tray of freshly baked muffins. Are you done obsessing over the new girl yet? Samantha shook her head, her eyes narrowing. Not even close. Something big is happening, and I'm going to figure out what it is. Laura sighed. You know curiosity killed the cat, right? Samantha smirked. Good thing I'm not a cat. Megan sat at her desk, the manila folder open in front of her. Her eyes scanned the contract again, focusing on the clause that had sealed her fate years ago. The words blurred as memories flooded back, nights spent working tirelessly for people like Nathan, people who didn't understand the meaning of boundaries or mercy. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw another message. You know what to do. Midnight. The storage facility. Megan's hands clenched around the phone. She shoved the folder back into the chest, slamming the lid shut. This wasn't her life anymore, but Nathan clearly hadn't gotten the message. Meanwhile, Jake stood in his small living room, flipping through his old photo albums. The image of the boy in Megan's photo had been haunting him all night. Finally, he found it, a photo of himself as a child, standing by a lake with his parents. His breath caught. The boy in Megan's photo wasn't just familiar. He was identical to Jake as a child. Jake stared at the photo, his mind racing. How could Megan have a picture of him? And why was it locked away in that old chest? He grabbed his jacket and phone, dialing Ethan as he walked out the door. Ethan, I need your help, Jake said, his voice urgent. Whoa, what's going on? Ethan asked. I think my new neighbor knows something about me, something from my past. Ethan laughed nervously. What, like she's a secret agent or something? I'm serious, Ethan, Jake snapped. There's a photo in her apartment. It's me. As a kid. Ethan paused. Okay, that's weird. Want me to come over? No. I need to figure this out first, Jake replied before hanging up. At the same time, Samantha was digging through her collection of notebooks, her unofficial neighborhood files. She prided herself on knowing everything about everyone on the block, but Megan was proving to be a mystery. No family photos, no personal items in sight, just that old wooden chest she'd spotted. Who are you, Megan? Samantha murmured to herself. Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed a familiar car pulling up outside Megan's building. Nathan stepped out, looking around cautiously. Samantha ducked behind her curtain, watching as he approached the building and slipped inside. Her heart raced. She grabbed her coat and phone, ready to investigate. Megan froze when she heard the knock at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound sent a chill down her spine. When she checked the peephole, her worst fear was confirmed, it was Nathan. She opened the door a crack, her expression cold. What are you doing here? Nathan smirked. Just checking in. Wanted to make sure you didn't forget about tonight. I didn't forget, Megan said, her voice tight. Good, Nathan replied, stepping closer. Because if you do, things will get complicated. Megan glared at him but said nothing. After a tense moment, Nathan turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her hands trembling. As Nathan exited the building, Samantha ducked behind a parked car, her phone in hand. She snapped a quick photo of him and watched as he drove off. Gotcha, she whispered to herself. Later that night, Megan drove toward the storage facility on the edge of town, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The streets were dark and empty, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, amplifying her anxiety. When she arrived, she parked near the entrance and glanced around. The facility was eerily quiet, the faint hum of security lights the only sound. She stepped out of the car and walked to Unit 47, where Nathan had instructed her to meet him. The metal door loomed ahead, and Megan hesitated before unlocking it. Inside, Nathan stood waiting, his arms crossed. Behind him were stacks of boxes and a single, battered suitcase. About time, Nathan said. I'm here, aren't I? Megan shot back, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathan walked over to the suitcase and unzipped it, revealing a pile of documents. He pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to Megan. You'll deliver this tomorrow. No excuses, Nathan said. Megan took the envelope reluctantly. And after that? We'll see, Nathan replied with a smirk. Back in the neighborhood, Jake couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, the photo still clutched in his hand. Finally, he grabbed his keys and decided to confront Megan. As he approached her building, he noticed another figure lurking nearby. It was Samantha, holding her phone and peering up at Megan's window. Samantha? Jake called out, startling her. She spun around, her face flushed. Jake! What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, Jake replied, his voice suspicious. Samantha hesitated before blurting out, something's off about her, Jake. I saw her meeting a strange man today, and I just have a feeling she's hiding something. Jake frowned. What kind of man? Tall, leather jacket, looks like trouble, Samantha said. Jake's mind raced. He had to find out what was going on. Megan barely made it back to her apartment before collapsing onto her couch. She tossed the thick envelope onto the coffee table and buried her face in her hands. The weight of everything was suffocating, Nathan's threats, her past catching up, and the strange, unsettling feeling that she wasn't as invisible in this neighborhood as she hoped to be. The sound of her doorbell startled her, and she froze. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially at this hour. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but the persistent ringing forced her to her feet. She tiptoed to the door and checked the peephole. Jake. Her stomach sank. She didn't have the energy for small talk, but ignoring him would only raise suspicion. With a deep breath, she unlocked the door and opened it slightly. Jake, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's late. What's wrong? Jake shifted uncomfortably, holding a crumpled photo in his hand. Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Megan hesitated before nodding and stepping aside. Jake entered, glancing around as if trying to confirm some suspicion. What's going on? Megan asked, folding her arms. Jake held up the photo. This. I found it in my old albums. Megan's eyes flickered to the image, and her breath caught. It was the same boy from her own photograph, Jake as a child. Why do you have a picture of me? Jake asked, his voice low but firm. Megan stammered, her mind racing for an explanation. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake frowned, stepping closer. Don't lie to me, Megan. That picture in your chest, I saw it. It's me, isn't it? Why do you have it? Megan's back was against the wall, and she could feel her carefully constructed facade crumbling. It's not what you think, she said finally. Then tell me what it is, Jake pressed. Before Megan could respond, a loud bang echoed through the building. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the door. What was that? Jake whispered. Megan's pulse quickened. She grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away from the door. "Stay quiet," she hissed. Another bang followed, this time closer. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Megan's phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she lunged for it, silencing the screen before the noise could give them away. She glanced at the new message. "You should have kept him out of this." Her blood ran cold. Jake noticed her expression and whispered, "What's going on, Megan?" She shook her head, her voice barely audible. "You need to leave. Now." "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth," Jake replied stubbornly. But before Megan could argue, there was a sharp knock at the door. "Megan," a deep voice called out. It was Nathan. Jake looked at her, his confusion turning to alarm. "Who is that?" Megan put a finger to her lips, motioning for him to stay silent. "I know you're in there," Nathan said, his tone dangerously calm. "Open the door, or I'll let myself in." Megan's mind raced. She grabbed Jake's hand and whispered urgently, "The fire escape. Go. I'm not leaving you." "Go," she snapped, pushing him toward the window. Jake hesitated for only a moment before climbing out onto the fire escape. Megan took a deep breath, steeling herself, and opened the door. Nathan stood there, his expression unreadable. He glanced around the room, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been busy." "What do you want, Nathan?" Megan asked, keeping her voice steady. Nathan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You weren't supposed to involve anyone else. Now you've made this messy." Megan crossed her arms, glaring at him. "Jake has nothing to do with this. Leave him alone." Nathan smirked. "You don't get to make demands. You made your choice when you walked away, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." Megan's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I delivered your message. That's all I'm doing." Nathan chuckled, his tone laced with menace. "You think it's that simple?" Before Megan could respond, there was a commotion outside. Jake had climbed back onto the fire escape, and the sound of his heavy footsteps was impossible to miss. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the window. "Looks like your friend isn't very good at staying out of trouble." Megan's stomach dropped. She stepped in front of Nathan, blocking his path. "Leave him out of this," she demanded. Nathan smiled coldly. "You really don't understand how this works, do you?